Go ahead, Jan.
Hello. What do you want me to say?
No, you say this is Jan Rutherford, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
Gotcha. Hey, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership, and you're listening to the Break It Down show.
Yeah, hey, thanks for coming on the show, Jan. And we see on the screen here, we got Tom Coyle here, he was a guest just a few weeks ago, and now all of a sudden he's co-hosting, and he's going to be producing some episodes with us. So I thought I would say hey, Tom, welcome to the team. Thank you so much. And this is your inaugural production and co-host. Thank you for doing that. And Jan, thanks for coming on. Tom, why do we have Jan on the show?
So Jan Rutherford, he and I, we met through mutual contact a few years ago, actually, and we're both in the leadership space and both kind of doing some experiential stuff. A lot of mine evolved more. So I started off in the outdoor space, as does Jan, and he takes people on. He's got his Crucible expeditions, and he'll go into more about some of the great stuff he's doing. And I was going to do the same thing, but mainly for youth. And then more and more, my stuff's kind of evolved more to the Civil War battlefield space. But we've stayed in touch over the years, both having a common Army background and some common folks we knew. And Jan's been great in terms of being someone I could use as a sounding board, bounce some ideas off. And he's had his own fascinating career in the Special Forces and now a leadership coach. And he's been growing his own podcast, offering a wealth of information for folks out there. And he's just a real great guy to have on the show, I think just really someone to just him and I did an interview not too long ago on LinkedIn together, which got a lot of interest there. And he's just a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of ideas.
Oh, thanks, Tom.
Appreciate that. No problem at all.
Yeah, and I'm going to put the links to your website here in the show, so anybody who's watching be able to check that out and go take a look at what Jan's doing. Let's a lot of people from the special operations community, Jan, focus on leadership. Jocko is the first one that comes to mind, but just a lot of folks that do that. One of the things that I know from my military background is that when you ask people about when you ask people about the leadership training that they've had in the civilian world, a lot of it's ad hoc, on the job training, catch as catch can, and they don't have a dedicated leadership development program. I mean, an E5 goes to PLDC in the Army. L is for leadership, and you don't ever stop being led and leading things. Is that why we're so common in the leadership space as veterans?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, actually, I was really lucky because when I left the military, I joined a big pharmaceutical company based out of Kansas City, and we had phenomenal leadership development. In fact, I learned as much through that process as I did even in the military. Now, the military was different because I went in as a teenager at 17 years old. So, it was quite the imprint. And when I went in, we weren't at war. And so everything was training and lots of training. And all the folks that were my leaders were Vietnam veterans. And even to this day, a lot of those folks were pretty well known and pretty famous. And at the time, I didn't realize the extraordinary opportunity I had to be with other people that were so great. So, my experience wasn't about, being deployed into a combat zone and having that experience. It was about, really working with some phenomenal leaders and observing, what made them so special. And that's really what I took from it. And as I went through my civilian career, my business career, and all the great leaders I saw there as well, I still held them to the standard of what I first saw as a teenager in the military.
So to follow up on that point, Jan, to get your thoughts on it, like for instance, right now, I think there's been never more opportunities. Well, I've never seen more leadership coaches out there. And so you have all these people out there doing this, but I don't think we've ever been worse at leadership. And I'd welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, there's a fellow we interviewed on our podcast by the name of Jeffrey Pfeffer, a professor from Stanford, who basically talks a lot about how much money is spent and wasted on leadership development. And I think he makes a great point because people don't start with the end in mind. What is the outcome we're trying to seek here? The other thing is back, 30 years ago, there was no such thing as a player coach. The manager was the manager, and the manager's job was to manage and lead and develop people. I remember in this, when I was in a big pharmaceutical company, when I first became a manager, I didn't have any responsibilities other than developing my people. I mean, 4 days a week, I was with my people, working with them, developing, writing follow-up notes, coaching them, counseling, having difficult conversations, helping them get promoted. 1 day a week, I wrote all those letters. I did the follow-up. I did my administrative, my expense report. But 4 days a week, I was with the troops, if you will. And that's largely disappeared because we're trying to be more productive, more efficient. And so, again, this industry that didn't even exist 3 decades ago is blossomed because everybody's out there saying, hey, if I want to be self-reliant, I better hire somebody to help me, to give me, honest, truthful feedback, to help hold me accountable for the things I'm trying to improve and develop. So again, I think it's a great industry if people start with the end in mind. And the last thing I'll say is, oftentimes as a coach, the first question we ask people is, what do you want? And that seems to be the really hard question for people to answer because they haven't really taken a step back and said, well, what the heck do I want out of my life, out of my career, out of this position? What do I need to do to really, make a difference in this world, make a difference in the lives of other people? Because that's what we all want ultimately.
One of the things I've noticed from my own time in corporate world and talking to friends and trying to figure these things out, because I work more on the cultural side when I do corporate work, is letting someone know that why they're valuable and then what's next for them. I sat at a desk at CDW and had an enormous goal that grew every month over my head, and I worked in a government space. So government doesn't work on it works on it's got its own times when you spend money. And so I always felt like nobody actually cares about me here. There is no plan. And when I brought forward ideas like this is an area where I think I could excel, maybe get off the sales floor and do something else, no one cared about that, right? So we spend a lot. The leadership, from my point of view, and from what I've seen from my friends, is that they're focused on just being in charge of the thing, not of the people. And so the people are like, yeah, you just do your job, and then you're not valued. You become a commodity, and then that commodity will leave. I've got friends who I work with at CDW that are vice presidents of things now. Why didn't CDW keep them? Why didn't they value them?
Yeah. Well, I'll put a question out for the listeners. All of you leaders out there, I guarantee you're tracking all kinds of stuff right now. You've got spreadsheets, you've got notes, you've got all kinds of stuff on all the tasks and the projects and the products and the accounts and the clients. How many of you actually have a spreadsheet of the people that you work with that lists out their birthdays, their anniversaries, their children, their hopes, their desires, their motivations, what you're working on from a coaching perspective, how many times you've actually interacted with them? I would almost guarantee it's less than 5% of people are keeping track of what we often say is the most important thing in our work world is people. But we don't even have a baseline of how we're doing with those and put that importance on it. The other thing I would throw out as a challenge is, if I looked at your calendar over the last 6 months, what's the percent of time that you have spent with your people? And then what is it that you would like to be that percentage? One of the most successful people I've met who sold his company for $500 million told me that he was successful because he spent 60% of his time working with and developing his people. 60%. I would say he was definitely in the 1%, in the 99 percentile of people that did that. And again, I don't know what the number is, but I almost guarantee it's bigger than what we're currently spending today, because the people are always going to be the most important thing, but never the urgent thing unless there's a problem. And that's the worst time to spend.
Yeah, when every time you go see your boss, you feel like you're in trouble. You've got a real problem, because
Right.
If you act like I don't matter, I believe you.
Right.
And all I ever see are people getting cardboard boxes and being walked out. I believe, and they get like surprised, waylaid. I mean, I understand why corporations surprise people when they let them go, but everybody else on the floor is like, what just happened? Oh my God, they're cutting heads. And production and engagement have to go down when that kind of thing happens.
Right. Well, we know, 40% of people out there today are ignored by their boss. This is pre-pandemic number, 40%. And we're social creatures. You ostracize us, it's emotional torture. And they might be ignored because there's apathy, they're too busy, they don't want to have a difficult conversation, whatever it is. So we're doing that. The other thing I would say is, if you're a boss and your people don't know where they stand with you, shame on you. Absolutely shame on you. You know, and research just came out about 2 weeks ago from McKinsey, and they looked at, drivers of life satisfaction. About a quarter of that has to do with work. And of that work, a third of it has to do with interpersonal interactions. And of that third of interpersonal interactions, 80% has to do with your immediate supervisor. So, bad bosses can actually do harm to the psyche. And, as a former medic, we had to take an oath, do no harm, just like the docs. But as leaders, nobody administers an oath like that to us, but they should. You literally should take an oath that says, I will do no harm, because we really can. And now more than ever, leaders are struggling with, how do I be compassionate and vulnerable and be a servant, and at the same time get stuff done, and because everybody's dealing with stuff at home, everybody.
And to follow up on that point, Jan, like one thing I've noticed that from a time piece, the thing is we've got more demands, and you kind of alluded that to a bit, and it's just people are going from meeting to meeting to meeting. One thing about like an awareness thing, we did this in an EO class where basically they're talking about, let's say I was the I'm the boss, Jan, you work directly for me, and Pete's the employee. Maybe you're created a hostile work environment for Pete, but I don't really know because I'm just going from thing to thing to thing to thing. And then, but Pete's assuming I know, so he's not going to report it because he's like, well, Tom, it must be tolerated, but because surely Tom must know, but I just have no idea. And I mean, it's this idea of saying no. And I'd like to get your thoughts on this because I see if you're always going to meetings, you can't be where you are. And I think the meetings have just evolved into something where it's just decision-making avoidance, which makes you feel good about collaboration. So I'd like to hear some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, that's, I noticed that right at the beginning of the pandemic. I had a lot of people say at the very beginning, it was, I worked my whole life for a big challenge. This is a big leadership challenge. And then about then there was a second phase where it was kind of like, okay, this is getting old. The culture is eroded. I don't really recognize what I see. And then recently I've seen we're in this, what I call trough of despair. Everybody's kind of down the dumps. We're tired of this. And now we're revisiting the culture and we're saying, typically, what's going on here? And my question always is, well, is the culture by design or is it by default? And part of a big determinant of culture is the way that you run meetings, the way you interact with humans. And most of the time we don't need meetings to pass on information, to do status updates and different things like that. We have to really decide, what's the meeting for? Is it to make a decision? And if so, who has the authority? What's the process? What's the criteria to make the decision? If it's, we want to motivate people, whatever it is. But what I'm seeing the big mistakes is, one, there's no criteria by which you have these meetings. Like, hey, do you have good lighting, good sound? Are you framed, or are you doing one of these? Have we set the rules and the standards by which we meet? And is there an agenda? Is there a follow-up? Are there minutes? The second thing is, most of the meetings I'm seeing are way too big. A Zoom call with 50 people on is a complete waste of time. I mean, I run a course right now for the University of Colorado, and we've got 12 students. That's about as big as I would want to work with people online in a group. And in a meeting, boy, if you can get the group small, keep the meeting short, be really consistent, I think you're gonna make people a lot more productive.
That's something interesting earlier. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Tom. Take the next one.
I just said absolutely. I was just agreeing.
The other thing you said earlier was culture, by default or by design. And I would even go further. And look, you're an SF guy. You know how this goes. Culture defies design. It's what is your culture? Where are you at now, right? And you can say, well, we have a design, but if your design is getting you a default result, you got a real problem. Again, the structure. And I talk a lot about affect over effect.
Mhm.
You can have 100 meetings, you can have a bonus program, but if people are disdainful of you and the program, you don't have a very good program.
Yep. No, that's absolutely right. And but it is you have to be intentional about this. As a leader, you create the environment. And I always compare it to an intersection. You've got a really busy, crazy intersection where there's accidents happening all the time. You can do one of two things. Well, three things. You can say the drivers are bad and they need to get driver's ed and train them because the behaviors are bad. Or you can say we need a traffic cop, a micromanager, to make sure the behaviors are right. Or three, let's redesign the friggin' intersection because it's a bad intersection. So I think in organizations, oftentimes we look at behaviors and we say we have bad people acting badly. And then we micromanage them, and then we don't see the results. Instead of saying, why are we seeing these patterns of behavior? What is it we need to do from a design perspective with incentives and structure and processes and meetings and the way that we communicate? Those are all the things that contribute to that. And again, what we're trying to do is get people engaged and excited. And all we have to do is go back to Dan Pink's work on what motivates us. And it's real simple, and research has proven this even more now during the pandemic. We want autonomy. We want the autonomy. We want to develop self-mastery. We want to get better and feel like we're growing and developing. And we want to know that what we're working on serves a greater purpose. And that's a leader's job, is to articulate, well, how's this fit into making the world a better place? So
how much? Go ahead, Tom.
So I was going to look at it from a standpoint of, I think one of it is, you kind of alluded, it just seems to me we're doing so many policies where we cater things to the bottom 20% as opposed to unleashing the most productive people. For example, I remember I had a policy, they had a policy when I was at an organization where they said basically you could work out 3 hours a week on the company time, but it couldn't be the last hour of the day or the first hour of the day. Because if they figured people would just use that to leave early or come in late or that kind of thing. Like, well, okay, some people will, but most people are going to use it for what it's intended for. And that's the whole thing about training. It's like, oh, we always have training when someone screws up. Hostile workplace. Okay, leadership trainings. Someone harasses somebody, touches someone inappropriate. Okay, now we're having training. So now it's like, okay, you're already going in there with the blinders on. Like, okay, this. Who screwed up that I have to sit through this today? So what have you seen in that space, and how do you get around that?
Well, we had a guest on the show recently who basically said, well, you have to remember rules are sticks, incentives are carrots. And the research has shown over and over, those aren't the best things to modulate behavior. As a former SF guy, as a Green Beret, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, we hate rules. I mean, that was the great thing about Special Forces. It was, hey, let's figure out the easy, smart way to do things, not the hard way. Here's what's interesting, Tom. You mentioned the bottom 20%. What I'm seeing more and more these days, especially in sales departments, in the sales function of organizations, a lot of that staff has been cut, and sales have not suffered. And when we look at that, I mean, it's the greatest place in an organization where you can see that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. The Pareto principle. But what we haven't done is we still treat every salesperson the same. They have the same incentives, same structure, same process, same rules. Like, why? If you're superstars in any organization are superstars, why don't you pull them aside and say, what else do you need? Because most of them would say, you know what? I want a little team around me to do the crap I don't want to do. And then I can do what I'm really good at more, better, faster. And we don't do that because oftentimes as leaders, we're too insecure. We're afraid because of rules, we're going to get in trouble because we went outside the boundaries, God forbid. But I think that's what organizations need to look at is, hey, your superstars, what do they want and need? And create it around them. And if you got people that have hurt feelings because they're not being treated the same way the superstars are, then tell them to perform like a superstar. Or, you can help them market their resume somewhere else.
I like that. It reminds me of one of my favorite football quotes from Jimmy Johnson. He had thrown a guy up there who was like a practice squad player, showed up late to a meeting or fell asleep in a meeting, threw him off the team. And he goes, "Well, what'd you have done if that was Troy Aikman?" I'd have woken him up. And obviously treat people fairly, not equally. And you're like, hey, Troy's in there first guy in the morning. He's the last guy to leave. If he's falling asleep, he's just tired.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I hadn't heard that. Yeah. Interesting.
When it comes to leadership, one of the things we learn in the military is that as a leader, your time in that leadership command role is temporary, and so you're always working on self-developing so you're ready for that next level up. You're also prepared to step into someone else's job if needs be, and you're also simultaneously developing people below you. It's this massive matrix of constant development and leadership. So even if you're not the leader, you're still in a leadership role most of the time, I would say. Mm-hmm. Do companies get that aspect and like the vertical needs of a leader? Like if I'm mentoring you as my section leader, I should be able to go down to the people that you're leading and say, "Hey, what's next for you? What's on your plan?" And if I can't find that, now I know I've got a leadership problem that I'm not dealing with. I've got a manager who's not communicating with my people. And if I value them, even if they are sleepers, "Hey, why are you falling asleep in this meeting? I've got 3 jobs. I don't get paid enough." Let's work on that. Maybe your job is maybe you should go somewhere else, but let's help that person and consider them valuable. Because what's more valuable than someone willing to come and do 8 hours of work and be away from their family and drive an hour each day? If we don't value them, then we're going to have problems.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You bring up a great point about all these different aspects. And, I'm reminded that the skip level interview really sounds good in theory, that you're going to not only your direct report, but they're the people that report to them. Right. And it sounds good in theory, but what it does oftentimes is it can undermine, that layer of management. They can be threatened by it. I remember as a CEO, I'd go down and I'd talk to people and I thought I was doing the right thing. And my team hated it because then I'd come into staff meetings, go, "Well, I heard this, I heard that. We need to do this. We need to do that." And so it's kind of a tightrope that you walk. Yeah. But where I find that the real challenge amongst all these layers is when we really get down to it is, and say the art of leadership is on one hand, we're trying to get stuff done. We're trying to deliver results. We're trying to win. And on the other hand, we're trying to do this in a way that people are following us willingly with their heart and their soul and their hands. And I mean, that's a tight rope because on one side, if we're all task and not compassionate, we're not going to have hearts and souls. If we're way over here on empathy, people aren't going to get stuff done. And so, I mean, that's what we've got to constantly look at. And I always think of a balance board. If you've ever sprained an ankle and had to work on a balance board, there's no such thing as keeping that balance board perfect. Eventually you're going to go to one side, eventually you're going to go to the other. And I think that's, as leaders, as we get older and more experienced, we understand the nuance that, I'm never going to be I'm perfectly balanced. I've got to figure out when to be on one side, when to be on the other. And when do I ease up? And I tie that into what I call pace, because the direction for most of us is set. We got to get from A to B. We got to hit this number. That's not up for debate. But how quickly we get there is up to us as leaders. Just like if we're going up to the top of a mountain, we can't go as fast as the fastest guy. We got to go as slow as the slowest person. And we've got to take more breaks. We've got to measure it. We got to let people drink and have food and different things. And I think that's what we've got to keep in mind during this pandemic is, we've got to figure out a pace that works for the entire team. And so we've got to really use these.
No, this is right. And there are so many variables in the COVID time. Like there's all these stories on LinkedIn about people getting mad at someone because their wireless jumped a little bit. And we put a lot of things on the person on the other side of the screen. Turns out you don't know where the problem is. Could be your problem, could be their problem. And really it's out of our hands. Like everybody's on the internet. It's going to be questionable sometimes. And so as soon as we start putting that on somebody else, that should be us thinking about our balancing board, like, hey, I've got to focus on doing the best that I can do right here. And I wanted to take your example and go further. I wrecked my ankle in Iraq one time, and the doctor gave me therapy, and he's like, do with your toes, make the shape of every letter in the alphabet and do that during meetings. And, you know, it was horrible. It hurt so bad, but I had to do it. Like, that's where the work was. And where the work usually is for us, it's not comfortable. You know, you have to work in uncomfortable areas. You can, if you're a superstar salesperson and they move you into the management thing to create more of you, your job is not to help people close deals. It's to clone yourself, you know, and you may not be good at that at first, but that's that work, that balancing thing where they need you to replicate yourself as best you can, you know. It's hard. It's not easy to be that uncomfortable for a long time too.
Right. It's also sort of,
go ahead.
Part of it, I think, is also just about how we understand metrics. For instance, if you're take that sales example there, Pete, if you're a salesperson, you know what your job is, sell, close deals. Now you're promoted. You're less sure about what is it that I'm doing that demonstrates value. That's how you get so much meetings. You say, well, hey, Jan's another sales manager, and he goes to 6 meetings a week. Well, I'll go to 7. That means I'm more valuable. Pete's like, well, shit, I'll go to 8. And I'm more valuable. And that's how the vicious cycle happens.
Yeah. Well, again, I think, you know, one of the big things, again, my firm is called Self-Reliant Leadership. And I think one of the big things is we have to take personal responsibility. And that's an expectation a leader helps people understand. Like, hey, this organization is a vessel by which we're going to help you grow and develop, and we've got to get stuff done. I mean, we have to survive as an organization, but let me remind you, you have a responsibility to produce more value than you cost, period. You must do that. I don't even care if you're in a nonprofit. The second thing is you're partly responsible for developing that self-mastery, you know, to growing and developing and getting better. And think of it this way. You know, we're all a professional sports team. You got to make the roster every year because there's competitors that are getting faster, smarter, and better every day. And we've got to keep up with them. If we don't, we're dead in the water. And the same thing is there's people coming into this organization, new people that are smarter, faster, better. And, you know, hopefully your experience is creating more wisdom, which is value, but it's got to translate. It can't just be you're the best pontificator. You know, you got to get stuff done. And again, if our people don't understand that and they're not behaving the right way, then shame on us for not outlining those expectations. Shame on us for not upholding the standards and providing consequences. And shame on us for not having difficult conversations and having the courage to have those.
Yeah, I think that those are great words. The shame on us part of these things to balance out what we think we know about that person who's struggling on our team, you know, and what's causing their struggle. I mean, this could be, it could be the simplest problem, you know, like for a long time when I came back before, because no one would ever hire me, interview me or anything. So I struggled financially and I had all these small little couple $100 problems that I didn't ever have $200 to fix, and they got worse and worse. And so it might seem on the outside that I'm failing as a human, but I'm trying not to drown. You know, I can't register my car because I don't have $400. And then it becomes $500 to register, and then it gets worse and worse, you know? And so something as simple as that, like, you mean all this pressure is relieved if we focus on this one aspect? Let's focus here. It gets you focused on what's going on back at work. I'm not going to give you $200 or whatever, but let's work on this problem. How do we deal with this so that we can get you focused on work?
Yeah, I think that's good counsel. I just saw something Bill Gates said, you know, the reason he was successful so early on is he figured out early on that failure was not the opposite of success. You know, what he was doing, in the words of Bill George, who wrote Authentic Leadership, is he was constantly testing himself and reframing his life story. And that's what leaders do. They are constantly testing themselves, which means they will face failure. It doesn't mean they're a failure, but there's no way to test yourself all the time and win every single time. And again, I think that's the kind of environment we want to create. That's the kind of people we want to surround ourselves with, the people that are bold and that will do things. But as leaders, if we want people to act that way, bold, we can't have tons of rules, and we can't knock people down because, you know, they failed. We've got to provide the freedom but we also have to give them the white lines in which to operate, the lane, if you will. And again, that's our responsibility. And that's not a 15-minute status meeting once a week where you're at with this and this and this. It's actually getting down and talking to people and finding out, hey, is there anything that's changed in your family in the last week that I should be aware of? How are you finding resiliency right now? What do you need now?
Yeah.
What do you need tomorrow? I mean, those kind of questions and interactions, not the, hey, Tom, where are you at with this and this and this? Okay, you're going to have that for me tomorrow? Okay, great. That doesn't motivate anybody.
And I'm going to use an example here, by the way, because I've had to mute myself as my kids just got back. They're at their grandparents' house, and so obviously we're all kind of dealing with this here and these types of things, and creating the environment where you can actually encourage and say, hey, you know what? Hey, I got my junior executives here, so they might hear some noise in the background, and people being cool with that, and kind of talking about this whole reinvent thing is. And I apologize, I just lost my train of thought because I got the background going.
Well, you know what, Tom? I got to tell you, I'm actually jealous because my wife and I were talking at lunch today, and she was like, "Do you realize our youngest is about to turn 31?"
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm like, "Oh yeah."
That
seems like a long time ago, though, that we had a crazy house like that. We miss it.
Well, this is how, Alex, you get your thoughts on leaders and technology. I think we're misusing technology because these status updates we're talking about, like what I do when I got my teams, you get a Google spreadsheet. Hey, just update the spreadsheet with the latest status with that. That's how I get that. So in theory, these tools should be freeing me up to have the conversation that you're talking about, because I can create a shared document, shared stuff, and you get Microsoft Teams, which, for example, if you're using Microsoft, or the G Suite tools if you're on Google, and create all the update stuff is in there that you can look at any moment you want to. That way you can focus the conversations on the things you're talking about. And I don't know if your experience with that, or just some thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, it reminds me, 30 years ago, we thought we were all going to be working a 4-hour work week. All this stuff was supposed to make us so, efficient. And again, it's our fault. I mean, we have no one to blame but ourselves. And it gets back to, there's so many books out there right now. Ryan Holiday's Stillness is the Key. Greg McKeown, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less. When I take people on my crucible expeditions, the key phrase is always, well, you've got to slow down to speed up. Yep. We do this to ourselves. As Dwight Eisenhower would say, the urgent, important things will fill up your calendar. You don't have to worry about that one bit. The things that are super important and not urgent, the only way you're ever going to get those done is to schedule them. And that goes to the people and the development of people on your team. That will never be urgent. But you've got to put it on the calendar, and you've got to make it sacred. This is sacred. The time that I spend with my team. I mean, like, I almost want to go, show of hands. How many of you had bosses cancel meeting after meeting after meeting? And what's that say to you? I'm not very important.
Right.
Because they hey, they blow it off. Like, you report to me. Again, every day with the relationships we have with humans, we're either making deposits or we're making withdrawals. And every time you cancel a meeting at the last minute, you're making a big withdrawal on loyalty and respect, and even their dignity.
And those are small wins that are fairly simple to stack up. In the opportunities when I've had to lead folks, one of the first questions I always ask someone, especially if it's, we're going at it, it's pretty hard. Hey, how you holding up? Just in general, like, no, really. How you doing? Like, give me an update. Here's how I'm doing. It's hot out here. I'm tired. We've been walking around for 6 hours on this damn patrol. How are you doing? Like, oh man, this backpack's a little heavy. Well, shit, give it to me for a few minutes. We'll walk around. We'll take a break. I'll carry that water. Whatever it is. Because if you don't check in, right, you are your most valuable thing. I used to always say all the time, you guys appreciate this. I'm taking a nap, and someone would say, oh, we have this thing to work on. I'm like, there's going to be war going on when I wake up. Like I need to rest right now. I'm getting lethargic. Even if I'm still working, I'm working at 20% capacity. I need a break.
But you had the advantage, again, in the field on an expedition or at war, you can actually see people. You can look at them and know,
yes,
I've got to take something off, weight, or I've got to help them or whatever. But here, whether we're in virtual, in a real office and people are in their cubes, or we're virtual, it's really hard to know, is somebody keeping up? I mean, do they have too much weight, too little weight, carrying their load, not carrying it? What do they need? Well, again, I go back and I say, as leaders, we have to see the unseen, hear the unheard. And the only way to know what's in people's hearts and pains unexpressed and complaints not spoken is to take the time. When I coach people as an executive coach, sometimes it might take 90 minutes before we actually get to the thing. Because it's not really apparent. It's not that they're hiding something. As a coach, a leader, you're helping people self-discover things. And it means you're taking the time to ask questions because you care and you're listening and you're not rushed. And, I've had plenty of bosses back in the olden days that would take a half-hour meeting and stretch it out to 3 hours just because they knew we needed to work through some stuff. And that 3-hour investment, some of those investments that they made back then, I still remember to this day. I mean, it was worth a semester. It was like a same equivalent of a MBA course, a whole semester, and because somebody gave everything that they had to you for 3 hours.
Let's talk about
that's powerful.
Yeah, it is
powerful.
Let's talk about self-resilient leadership in a company that is failing because it's COVID time. I mean, I would say a number greater than 20% of companies are like, we may not still make it out of this thing. If there's a third big wave, we're done. So how do you lead when you have to have, I mean, it's a very challenging situation where you may not be getting the support, the money that you maybe had before to do things, how do you do that? How do you stay resilient and yet still perform?
Yeah. Well, it's a key question these days. It's, people are asking all about resilience, and, there's a lot of definitions out there, but what I think resilience is a decision. You've been knocked down, you've been set back, are you gonna get back up? Yes or no? I mean, it requires a little bit of self-discipline, a little bit of sacrifice. Now, I think the word really, as a leader, that I want to focus on is grit, because that's sustained persistence and determination. I can foster that. I can develop that in people. I can help them work through it. But as far as a decision, that resilience, whether, are you going to be down or are you going to get up, emotionally, mentally, physically, that's up to you. I mean, hopefully I create an environment where, you've realized, hey, I've been knocked down. All right, what did I learn? What the heck did I learn? I remember breaking my kneecap mountain biking in the Rocky Mountains, and my buddies were behind me, probably about 10 minutes, and I broke it down on this trail, and nobody was near me. And after I yelled 3 times at the top of my lungs, because I literally had a piece of knee in one spot and a piece of knee in the other. I remember thinking, the first thought was, what are the logistics? There's 3 bikes. I can't ride this anymore. Like, how, and they're going to have to help carry me down. Like, what are the car, the hospital, all that. And then almost immediately after I figured out the logistics, I went, what am I supposed to learn from this? And I knew it instantly. And it was, you're going to have to learn to be patient. The thing you're terrible at. You are not patient, and you are a terrible patient. And you're going to have to be relying on other people for a long time as you heal. And, I think this pandemic has given us an opportunity for all of us to go, where are the parts where I'm feeling sorry for myself? What do I've got to get back up. I mean, the times I felt sorry for myself during this is like, what do I have to feel sorry for? I've been inconvenienced. I don't have little kids that I'm trying to school. I mean, we have it there. I mean, I automatically go from feeling sorry for myself or, facing these difficulties over to the other side and thinking, what are all the things I have to be grateful for? And what am I supposed to learn from this? And also, by the way, like, hey, if I don't pick myself up, who's going to do it for me? Nobody. Nobody.
No, that's true. You always have a choice. I'm glad you kind of mentioned that. And we chatted a few times during the pandemic itself. And like for me, I had all my Civil War staff rides I typically do and booked that went out the window. And then well, what else do I know? And that's sort of me. I found a sort of another niche, speaking about AI and educating leaders about that. But it's just like all these things about, okay, what can I do? And our discussions certainly help me with that. Just like what can you do? You can't control everything, but what can you do?
Right.
I want to go back sort of this thing about just people and development. And a sergeant major said to me, my first sergeant major I had in the Army, he said to me, he said, "Sir, let me tell you what. Nobody comes in the Army and says, 'How do I screw up today?' That no one comes in there, and yet that's how we treat people." And kind of welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah. You just made me think back to all the sergeant majors that I had. What I remember, a lot of them, for whatever reason, when I was in, a lot of them wanted to memorize everybody's first name. Yeah, and they thought if I knew everybody's first name, I would be, more personable with people. Maybe that was just where I was at. But they were trying to be like almost like a union boss, like your friend, and trying to help you out. But I do agree that nobody comes to work and thinks how can I screw up. I think we have different levels of engagement based on again, I think everything we get from our team is a mirror of what we're putting out. One of the best experiences I ever had and worst experiences I ever had was being a sales guy for 4 years when I left the military. The worst part was basically all the rejection and feeling like you're low man on the totem pole. But the best thing was you really learned how to influence people. And it was really interesting because the good days were great and the bad days were terrible. And the thing I learned from it was, I could put the visor down in my car and look at myself. And, I was getting from my customers and my prospects what I was putting out. If I was putting out good vibes, I got good vibes. If I was having a crappy day, I got treated crappy. And it was almost like on the bad days, I should just go home, and regroup and go for a run or something. On the good days, I should just make 10 more calls because they're just going to be awesome. And what I learned over the years is that leadership is exactly the same, because leadership is influence, sales is influence. And what we put out there is what we get back. So oftentimes when people complain about their team, I'm like, well, okay, who's ultimately accountable and responsible for the behavior of those folks? Mm-hmm. Do they understand the expectations? Where do you share in the responsibility for this? Again, have there been consequences for this? Is this an opportunity to develop people? Again, a lot of that stuff gets put off. Well, it's Columbus Day. I'm not going to bother anybody today. Indigenous People Day. I'll wait till Thursday. Oh, tomorrow's Friday. Yeah, I'll wait till Monday. Oh, one of their kids is sick. I'm not gonna bother them. 3 months go by. It's like, it's not that important. Then you decide to ding them in the performance review. Like,
I read a book not so long ago, Eat That Frog. I don't remember the author, but the idea is you're gonna have to eat the frog anyway. Just get it over with and do it.
Yep.
I was wondering, we've kind of talked about what you're doing, but I'd love you to just kind of go in there and tell listeners about your Crucible. Like I think it's a very awesome event there. If you just go in a little bit about what that entails.
Yeah. Well, from my Army days, what was cool about it was when you both know this, when you go out in the field and people are cold, wet, tired, and hungry, you see their true character like that. And in the business world, sometimes you wouldn't see true character for a couple of years until there was a really big crisis or something happened. So I always thought, boy, if I could do leadership development out in the field, that would be cool. So I started doing that. And at the same time, I was getting a lot of inquiries from, veterans who are struggling. And I thought, why don't I just combine the veterans and the executives? The executives need a digital detox, and I'm going to make them uncomfortable in an environment they're not used to. And I'll pair them up with a veteran who is comfortable in the environment, but moving into a world they don't know, the business world. They don't know the vocabulary. I'll put them together and maybe magic will happen. The veteran will talk about leadership and teamwork in life or death situations. The executive will talk about what it means to actually create more value than you cost and to produce revenue as the, that's the infantry in the business world, or the naval aviator in the Navy or whatever. It's the ultimate. You got to be able to make it rain. So we started running these expeditions from Patagonia to Alaska, Utah, Colorado, Oregon. Next year, we're going to be in New Mexico near Santa Fe. And we usually have a dozen folks out there. And almost every time we videotaped it and created courses and documentaries. And like I said before, the big takeaway always is you've got to slow down to speed up. And we talk a lot about communication, decision-making, pace, responsibility, creating a great environment, and what it means to be vulnerable. And the reason it works is because when you put a bunch of strangers together, they have nothing to prove, promote, or protect. Unlike in the business world, where everybody has something to prove, protect, and promote. You strip those things away, you get who people are.
One of the things I like to ask people when I do things about culture or just in general, or these self-assessment type things that we suck at doing. Who here in this room is below average as a leader? Go ahead and raise your hand. And nobody raises their hand. And the point is not to determine who's a bad leader or not. The point is just to say, look around. Some of us are not being honest with ourselves, and you probably can't see it. Same thing with culture, same thing with, I use that same thing with interpreters, with military operators. Like, hey, who here is terrible at working with an interpreter? Go ahead and raise your hand, and then keep your hand up if you ever receive training on working an interpreter at the professional level. And all the hands go down because there is no training. So when you think about these things where you bring in a preconceived notion into an area, like you said, it's perfect, Jan. It's like, slow down. So I'm going to go have this encounter with this person. The people are the most valuable asset here. It's a good chance that I've missed something that I should have done. It's a good chance that there's something that I haven't considered about this person. Even if they're an absolute piece of trash, I can always get mad at them. You can always break out the hammer and start hammering. But if what you really need is that magnet to extend out and go pick that one screw out, that's what you need to start with. And that's what I've learned as a leader, is just to slow down and go, okay, I'm mad at this. I'm aggravated. Let me go talk to this person and be not aggravated for as long as possible and see what else is there, and then let them give me something to work with, and then I can adjust to that. And then if they're still a piece of shit, then you just deal with it then.
Yeah. Well, you remind me of, the Johari window. I don't know if either of you have ever heard of it. It's basically a matrix, and and it's I know what I know. I know what I don't know. I don't know what I don't know. And the whole idea is for you to figure out, your blind spots, you've got to ask people. And for people to understand you better, you have to tell people. And, and for if there's a blind spot for you and the other people, then you've got to do some collaboration with them. But in either case, there's got to be some vulnerability, and you've got to be willing to ask for feedback, and you've got to be willing to tell people and disclose things. Yeah. But again, that's up to the leader to create an environment where that's, safe to do. And again, when we do that, we're getting closer to the point where when we do need to have good, healthy conflict and difficult conversation, we can have it because there's already been a certain degree of disclosure and awareness.
I've worked my heart out, right? I'm Mr. Manager guy. I've worked my heart out to be a good manager. I've read Jocko's book. I've been to your website, listened to the podcast. But how do I self-assess? How do I know if I'm doing a good job? What are my KPIs?
Boy, that's a great question. The best thing, from a leadership perspective, if you do this, Pete, if you do this and you turn around, If people are following you, that's a good sign. And in the work world, I mean, that translates to retention. I mean, we all know people join companies and they quit bosses. I mean, what's your retention rate? And let's say you're not in a traditional company. I mean, are people signing up to, for your services? Do they value what you're doing? Are people following and staying with you and being loyal? And, do you find people around you supporting you? I mean, to me, that's the best indication of whether you're doing that right. And again, the other part is if you've got enough people around you that'll, be truth tellers, that'll help you and give you feedback and let you know. And again, you've got to ask people for that. And when they give you feedback, there's only two words you can utter when you get feedback, and that is thank you. If you start defending it, explaining it, you're done. They're never going to give you feedback because it's like, God, that's painful. But if Pete asked me for feedback and I went, Pete, hey, stay closer to the mic, and you go, okay,
yes, sir.
Thank you. then that would be great. If you started to go, well, I was doing this, and I'm like, okay, I'm not going to bother. And by the way, you don't need to stay closer to the mic. Yeah. You're fine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I know we're coming up on the time when we got to let you go. Do you have another question, Tom, at all?
No, I'm good. Just Jen, thank you for coming in. In fact, every time I talk to you, I'm taking notes, and I always learn something from you. So I hope the listeners have learned a few things.
Yeah,
here.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, you guys asked some great questions. We covered a lot of ground, actually. What I'd throw out there to the listeners is, when I look at all the successful people we've had on our podcast and all the people I've met that I respect, I think are interesting, are the it kind of goes back to what Dale Carnegie said in his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, be interested versus interesting. And really what it was a call to be compassionately curious. And all the great people I've known are more curious about other people than just talking about themselves. So that's what I'd put out there is, as a leader, as an influencer, as a salesperson, just be curious. Read lots of books, ask lots of questions, listen to great podcasts, figure out how you can better position yourself to make a difference in this world.
I love it. Hey, anybody who wants to connect with Jan can do it. You can look on the page here and you can see the links on LinkedIn. Of course, you can go to the website, and I'll throw that link up here now. And if you're listening on the podcast, I'd look in the show notes, go to LinkedIn. Look, anybody who can sell the fact that they're a good leader and they've got backed up like this with what Jan has given you, you're going to be better off. So take a look at what he's doing. Get out there and work on it. And don't be so hard on yourself. It's COVID time. It's a lot of crazy going on. I like to say the COVID caveat applies to all things like COVID. All right, let me sign off. Hold on.